The mining transport Resilience had been drifting for 3 days when the navigation systems finally gave up completely. Captain Sarah Chun watched the last functional display flicker and die, leaving her alone in the darkness of deep space with nothing but emergency life support and the distant glow of an unknown star system. She had been returning from the Kepler 442 mining operation when the cascade failure began. First the main engines, then the backup power, then communications. Now she sat in what amounted to a metal coffin, slowly tumbling toward a yellow star that her instruments had briefly identified as harboring several planets before everything went dark. Sarah checked her water reserves again. 2 days, maybe 3 if she rationed carefully. The recycling system had failed along with everything else, and the emergency stores were pitifully small for a journey that had been supposed to take 6 hours. She allowed herself one small sip from her bottle and sealed it again. The Resilience shuddered as it entered the outer atmosphere of what appeared to be a habitable world. Sarah strapped herself into the crash couch and hoped the hull would hold together long enough for the emergency landing protocols to deploy. The ship bucked and rolled as it fell through increasingly thick air, and Sarah could hear the hull plating beginning to stress and warp. When the crash finally came, it was almost anticlimactic. The emergency systems deployed the landing cushions and retro thrusters at the last moment, and the Resilience hit the ground with a bone-jarring thump rather than the catastrophic impact Sarah had expected. She lay still for several minutes, checking that all her parts were still attached and functional. The air outside tested as breathable, though rich in oxygen and humidity. Sarah gathered her emergency kit and the precious water bottles and stepped out into an alien jungle that looked like something from Earth's prehistoric past. Massive ferns stretched toward a canopy so thick it filtered the sunlight into a green-gold twilight, and the air hummed with the sound of unseen insects and creatures. Sarah activated her emergency beacon, though she held little hope that any human vessel would detect it this far from the shipping lanes. She was effectively marooned on an unknown world with no way to contact the outside universe. Her first priority was finding water to supplement her dwindling supply. She had been walking for perhaps an hour when she encountered them. The aliens emerged from the undergrowth so quietly that Sarah didn't notice them until they were already surrounding her. They stood about 4 feet tall, with smooth gray-green skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything. Their faces were vaguely humanoid, but flattened, with small mouths and no visible nose. They wore simple clothing that looked like woven plant fibers. Sarah slowly raised her hands to show she meant no harm. "Hello," she said quietly. "I am Sarah. I'm lost." The aliens exchanged sounds that might have been language, though to Sarah's ears it sounded more like musical tones than speech. They seemed to be debating among themselves, glancing frequently at her, and then at each other. Sarah noticed they carried what looked like tools rather than weapons, and their body language seemed more curious than threatening. One of the aliens, slightly taller than the others with markings on its arms that might have been tattoos or natural coloration, stepped forward. It made a series of melodic sounds and gestured towards Sarah's water bottle, which she had clipped to her belt. Sarah understood immediately. These beings could see she was dehydrated and in distress. She unclipped the bottle and showed it to them, making drinking motions. The alien leader nodded, a surprisingly human gesture, and then made more musical sounds to its companions. What happened next would stay with Sarah for the rest of her life. The aliens conferred briefly, and then each of them reached into pouches they carried and produced small containers. Without hesitation, they began pouring clear liquid into Sarah's water bottle. She realized they were sharing their own water with a complete stranger, an alien they had never seen before. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she understood what was happening. These beings, who had no reason to trust her and every reason to be cautious about their own resources, were giving her the water she desperately needed. She tried to protest, to indicate that they shouldn't give up their own supplies, but the alien leader made soothing sounds and continued to pour. When they were finished, Sarah's bottle was nearly full. She lifted it with trembling hands and took a careful sip. The water was cool and pure, with a slight mineral taste that was actually quite pleasant. She lowered the bottle and looked at each of the aliens in turn, trying to convey her gratitude through her expression and body language. "Thank you," she whispered, knowing they wouldn't understand the words, but hoping they might understand the emotion behind them. The alien leader approached her again and made more musical sounds while gesturing toward the jungle. Sarah realized they were offering to guide her somewhere, probably to a source of water or shelter. She nodded and followed as they led her deeper into the forest. They walked for perhaps 2 hours, stopping frequently to allow Sarah to rest and drink small amounts of water. The alien seemed genuinely concerned for her welfare, often checking to make sure she was keeping up and offering her strange fruits that turn out to be surprisingly nutritious and flavorful. Eventually, they emerged into a clearing where Sarah could see what was obviously a settlement of some kind. Simple structures made from woven plant materials were scattered among the trees, connected by well-maintained paths. A stream ran through the center of the village, its water crystal clear and obviously the source of the community's water supply. The aliens led her to the stream and gestured for her to drink her fill and refill her bottle. They also showed her edible plants and fruits, demonstrating which ones were safe and how to prepare them. Sarah realized they were teaching her how to survive in their environment, sharing not just their resources, but their knowledge. Over the following days, the aliens cared for her with a kindness that transcended species barriers. They built her a simple shelter, brought her food, and taught her the basics of their language through patient repetition and gesture. Sarah learned that they called themselves something that sounded like Villani in human speech, and that their village was called Theron High, which seemed to mean place of peaceful waters. Sarah's emergency beacon continued to transmit, though she began to wonder if rescue would ever come. Part of her almost hoped it wouldn't. The Villani had shown her a kind of unconditional compassion that she had rarely experienced even among her own species. They expected nothing in return for their help, seemed genuinely happy to share their resources, and treated her not as an alien invader, but as a lost child who needed care. 3 weeks into her stay, Sarah was helping tend the village gardens when the sound of atmospheric engines echoed across the jungle. She looked up to see a human rescue ship descending toward the clearing, its sensors having finally locked on her beacon signal. The rescue team was efficient and professional, scanning her for injuries and loading her aboard their medical shuttle within minutes. As the ship prepared to lift off, Sarah looked back at the Villani village and saw the aliens who had saved her watching from the edge of the clearing. The alien leader raised one hand in farewell, and Sarah pressed her palm against the shuttle window in response. During the journey back to human space, Sarah told her story to the rescue team and later to the debrief specialists at the nearest military station. She described the Villani in detail, their location, their technology level, and, most importantly, their incredible act of kindness to a complete stranger. She emphasized repeatedly that these beings had saved her life without hesitation and asked for nothing in return. The military officials listened politely and filed her report in the standard databases. They thanked her for the information and noted the coordinates of the Villani world for future reference. Sarah got the impression that they considered it an interesting footnote, but hardly a priority for further action. She was wrong about that. Unknown to Sarah, her rescue, and the story of the Villani kindness had been recorded and transmitted throughout human space as part of the standard communication protocols. Every human ship, station, and colony received regular updates on rescue operations and first contact situations. Sarah's story was just one of hundreds of such reports that circulated through the networks each month. But humans, as it turned out, had very long memories when it came to kindness. On the mining station Kepler-7, where Sarah had been based, her story was discussed in the crew quarters and workshops. The miners talked about the aliens who had shared their water with a stranded human, and many of them began to see their own work differently. They were extracting resources from dead worlds while somewhere out there, living beings were sharing their most precious resources with strangers. On the transport ships that carried goods between the colonies, Sarah's story was passed from crew to crew. Pilots and cargo handlers who spent their lives moving resources from one world to another began to think about what it meant that aliens had given their water to someone they'd never met. In the research stations and universities, xenobiologists and anthropologists analyzed every detail of Sarah's report. They noted the sophisticated social structures implied by the Villani's collective decision to help her, the advanced understanding of alien physiology required to know that water was what she needed, and the remarkable absence of any apparent desire for reciprocation. But it was in the agricultural colonies where Sarah's story had the most profound impact. These were worlds where water was life, where every drop was precious and carefully managed. The farmers and terraforming specialists understood exactly what it meant that the Villani had poured their own water into a stranger's bottle without hesitation. Within 6 months of Sarah's rescue, the first supply ships began changing their routes. Vessels bound for the outer colonies started making subtle course corrections that took them closer to Villani space. Cargo manifests began to include items that seemed oddly specific: water purification tablets, portable filtration systems, weather monitoring equipment, and agricultural supplies. The Interplanetary Agriculture Consortium, which managed food production across dozens of worlds, quietly established a new shipping protocol. Any vessel passing within reasonable distance of the Villani system was authorized to make supply drops if needed. The official reason given was humanitarian aid to newly contacted species, but the real motivation was simpler than that. The Villani had given water to a human in need. Humans intended to make sure they never ran short of water again. The first official contact mission launched 8 months after Sarah's rescue. It was designated as a standard diplomatic survey, but its cargo bay was filled with water processing equipment, emergency supplies, and gifts from across human space. Children from the agricultural colonies had made drawings to give to the aliens who had helped the lost human. Mining crews had contributed rare metals that could be useful in construction. Even the military had quietly added medical supplies and communication equipment to the manifest. When the contact ship arrived at the Villani world, they found the village of Varenhai exactly as Sarah had described it. The aliens emerged from the forest with the same cautious curiosity they had shown her, and the human diplomatic team made contact using the basic language information Sarah had provided. The Villani seemed genuinely surprised to see humans return to their world. Through careful translation, the human team learned that the Villani had helped Sarah simply because she needed help, and they had never expected anything in return. They had actually been somewhat puzzled by human behavior, since their own experience suggested that most species preferred to be left alone after being aided. The human team explained that they had come to express gratitude and to offer assistance in return. They showed the Villani the gifts they had brought and demonstrated the water purification equipment. The alien leader who had first helped Sarah listened carefully and then made what the translators interpreted as an expression of polite confusion. Why? The Villani wanted to know, had the humans brought so much in return for such a small kindness? They had simply shared their water with someone who needed it. Any civilized being would have done the same thing. The human diplomat, Commander Torres, tried to explain through the primitive translation interface they had established. Among humans, he said slowly, when someone shows kindness to one of us, we remember. And when we remember kindness, we try to return it. What the commander didn't say, because he wasn't sure the translation software could handle the concept, was that humans had a particular way of returning kindness. They didn't just repay individual debts. When someone showed kindness to any human, all humans felt obligated to respond. The Villani accepted the gifts graciously, though they seemed somewhat overwhelmed by the scale of the human response to what they considered a minor act of courtesy. The human team helped them set up the water purification systems and taught them to use the new equipment. They also established communication protocols that would allow the humans to check on the Volani's welfare and respond to any needs they might have. As the contact ship prepared to leave, the Volani leader approached Commander Torres with what the translation system identified as a formal question. Through the interface, the alien asked whether all humans would respond this way to kindness shown to one of their species. Commander Torres looked at the Volani settlement, now equipped with enough water processing capability to supply a community 10 times its size, and thought about the dozens of ships already being rerouted to provide ongoing support. He thought about the agricultural stations preparing seed banks for Volani crops, the research institutes analyzing their requests for technological assistance, and the manufacturing centers that were already retooling to produce Volani-specific equipment. Yes, he said simply, we remember kindness, and we remember who showed it to us. 2 years had passed since first contact with the Volani, and the small village of Varenhai had become something of a pilgrimage site for human vessels. Not officially, of course. The Interstellar Commerce Commission maintains strict regulations about unauthorized contact with alien species. But somehow, an unusual number of ships found themselves with navigation errors that brought them within range of the Volani world, and an equally unusual number of those ships discovered surplus supplies that needed to be offloaded. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the xenosociologist assigned to monitor human-Volani relations, had watched this pattern develop with growing fascination. Her monthly reports to Earth documented a phenomenon unlike anything in the historical records of first contact situations. Typically, initial enthusiasm for newly discovered species faded within months as the novelty wore off and practical considerations took precedence. With the Volani, the opposite had occurred. Elena stood on the observation deck of the research station Endeavour, watching the third supply drop of the week descend toward the planet's surface. This one came from the mining collective at Proxima Centauri, and, according to the manifest, it contained advanced geological survey equipment and enough concentrated nutrients to support the Volani village for months. Dr. Vasquez, her assistant, Dr. Kim Sato, approached with a datapad. I've finished analyzing the supply flow patterns. You're going to want to see this. Elena took the pad and scrolled through Kim's analysis. The numbers were staggering. In the 24 months since first contact, human ships had delivered enough supplies to the Volani to support a population 50 times larger than the actual village. The deliveries included everything from basic necessities to advanced technology that the Volani couldn't even use yet. Look at the source distribution. Kim pointed to a chart on the screen. It's not just the big corporations or military installations. We're seeing contributions from individual families on the agricultural worlds, school children pooling their allowances to buy water purification tablets, even prisoners on the penal colonies requesting that part of their work credits be used to purchase Volani supplies. Elena shook her head in amazement. I've been studying human behavior for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. What's driving it? Kim pulled up another screen showing the communication logs from various human settlements. I think it's the story itself. Everyone knows about Sarah-chan and the water. It's become something of a legend. Parents tell it to their children, teachers use it in ethics classes, even military academies include it in their training programs about interspecies relations. Elena read through some of the communication transcripts. They were filled with references to the beings who gave water to our lost one, and the aliens who showed us what kindness looks like. The Volani had unknowingly tapped into something fundamental about human psychology. Dr. Vasquez, Kim continued, I think we're witnessing the emergence of a new cultural imperative among humans. The Volani kindness has become a defining moment, and humans feel collectively obligated to respond. Elena nodded slowly. She had been thinking along similar lines, but hadn't been willing to commit to such a dramatic conclusion. Have you analyzed the sustainability of this behavior? Can humans maintain this level of support indefinitely? That's the really interesting part, Kim said, pulling up economic projections. Not only can they maintain it, but the effort seems to be generating positive feedback loops. The agricultural worlds are developing new water-efficient crops partly because they're thinking about Volani needs. The manufacturing centers are creating more efficient purification systems. The research institutions are making breakthrough discoveries in hydroponic technology. Elena realized what Kim was suggesting. You're saying that helping the Volani is actually advancing human technology and social cooperation? Exactly. It's as if the entire human species decided to use the Volani as a test case for their most generous impulses, and it's making them better at everything they do. Elena filed Kim's report and requested a priority communication link with the Volani village. The translation protocols had improved dramatically over the past 2 years, thanks partly to the fact that several human linguists had voluntarily learned the Volani musical language system. The alien leader who had first helped Sarah-chan appeared on the screen. The translation system identified him as Theranon, which roughly meant keeper of the peaceful waters. Over the months, Elena had developed something approaching a friendship with him, though she was never entirely sure how much of their communication was being lost in translation. "Greetings, Theranon," Elena said, using the formal tones the translation system had taught her. "I hope your people are well." "All are well, friend Elena," came the response. "The waters run clear, and the gifts from your people continue to bring us great benefit. But I must speak with you about something that troubles us." Elena felt a moment of concern. Had some piece of human technology caused problems? Had the steady stream of visitors become burdensome? "Please tell me what concerns you." Theranon was quiet for a moment, and Elena could see other Volani gathering behind him. When he spoke again, his tones carried what the translation system interpreted as profound confusion. "Friend Elena, we have been trying to understand the continued generosity of your people. When we gave water to the lost one Sarah, we did what any civilized being would do. She needed help, and we provided it. But your people have responded as if we performed some great deed worthy of eternal gratitude." Elena chose her words carefully. Among humans, kindness to strangers is not always common. Your willingness to share your most precious resource with someone you had never seen before impressed us deeply. "But that is what troubles us," Theranon replied. "If kindness to strangers is uncommon among your people, how do you explain the tremendous kindness your people have shown to us? We are strangers to all humans, except Sarah, yet thousands of your people have sent us gifts and aid. By your own logic, this should be even more uncommon than our small act." Elena realized she had walked into a logical trap. The Volani, despite their peaceful nature, were clearly sophisticated thinkers. "You raise a valid point, Theranon. I think the difference is that your kindness to Sarah reminded us of what we could be at our best. Seeing your generosity inspired us to be more generous ourselves." "Ah." Theranon made the musical sound that indicated understanding. "So our small kindness has somehow made your entire species more kind? This is a remarkable transformation. Do all human communities respond this way to moral inspiration?" Elena posed. The honest answer was no. Human history was filled with examples of communities that responded to moral inspiration with temporary enthusiasm that quickly faded. The sustained, growing response to the Volani was genuinely unprecedented. "No," she admitted. "Our response to your people is unusual, even for humans. I think you touched something deeper than simple gratitude." Theranon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his tones carried what the translation system labeled as deep curiosity. "Friend Elena, we would like to understand your people better. This sustained kindness you have shown us suggests that humans have great capacity for generosity, yet you say kindness to strangers is uncommon among you. How do we reconcile this apparent contradiction?" Elena realized this was a pivotal moment. The Volani were asking fundamental questions about human nature, and her answer might shape their entire understanding of humanity. She decided on complete honesty. "Humans are complicated beings, Theranon. We have the capacity for tremendous kindness, but also for cruelty and selfishness. Most of the time, we exist somewhere in between these extremes. What you did for Sarah reminded us of our capacity for kindness and made us want to live up to that potential. So you are saying that our example helped your people become more like their ideal selves? Yes, exactly. There Anon made the sound that indicated he was conferring with other Villani. Elena waited patiently, knowing that their decisions were always collective. When he returned to the screen, his expression seemed different somehow. Friend Elena, we have decided to make a request of your people. It is something we have never asked for before. Of course. What do you need? We would like to learn how to be more like humans. Elena blinked in surprise. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? We have observed your people's response to our small kindness, and we find it remarkable. You take inspiration from moral examples and use it to become better versions of yourselves. We would like to learn how to do this. Perhaps your people could teach us about this process of moral growth through inspiration. Elena realized that the Villani had just requested something unprecedented in the history of interspecies contact. They weren't asking for technology or resources. They were asking humans to teach them how to be more ethically developed. Therein, I need to discuss this with my superiors, but I believe many humans would be honored to share our knowledge with you. However, I should warn you that learning from humans might change your society in ways you cannot predict. We understand this risk, Therein replied. But we have seen what humans can become when inspired to kindness. If we can learn to inspire such growth in ourselves and others, perhaps we can become more than we currently are. Elena ended the communication and immediately sent a priority message to Earth Command. Within hours, her communication triggered a cascade of responses throughout human space. The Villani wanted to learn about moral development from humans. The beings who had taught humanity about unconditional kindness wanted to learn how to grow ethically. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Universities offered to establish exchange programs. Philosophers volunteered to travel to the Villani world to engage in ethical discourse. Religious leaders from dozens of denominations requested permission to share their traditions of moral development. Even the military offered to provide insights into how ethical codes could be maintained under stress. But perhaps the most significant response came from an unexpected source. The Intergalactic Council of Ethical Philosophy, a prestigious organization that normally focused on abstract theoretical questions, announced that they were establishing a permanent research station in the Villani system. Their stated purpose was to study the bidirectional moral development occurring between humans and Villani. Dr. Marcus Chun, the council's director and coincidentally Sarah's uncle, explained their interest in a public statement. We are witnessing something unprecedented in the study of ethics. Two species are actively inspiring each other to become better versions of themselves. The Villani showed humans the power of unconditional kindness. Now, humans want to teach the Villani about moral growth and development. This represents a new model for interspecies relations based on mutual ethical elevation. Elena watched the preparations for the new research station from her position on the Endeavor. Ships arrived daily, bringing not just supplies and equipment, but also philosophers, ethicists, anthropologists, and theologians from across human space. The Villani system was becoming something like a laboratory for the study of applied ethics. But the most remarkable development was happening among the Villani themselves. As word of the planned exchange spread through their community networks across the planet, other Villani villages began reaching out to establish contact with humans. They had heard about the moral inspiration their cousins had provided to humanity, and they wanted to understand this phenomenon themselves. Within 6 months, the single village of Therenhai had become the center of a planet-wide movement among the Villani to engage with human moral philosophy. The aliens who had casually shared their water with a stranded human had somehow catalyzed a renaissance of ethical thinking among both species. Elena reflected on the irony as she prepared her quarterly report. The Villani had performed what they considered a trivial act of courtesy, sharing water with someone who needed it. That simple act had triggered a cascade of human generosity that was still growing after 2 years. Now, the Villani wanted to understand how moral inspiration worked, which was causing a resurgence of philosophical inquiry among humans. In her report, Elena wrote. The relationship between humans and Volani has evolved beyond traditional models of interspecies contact. Both species are actively working to become better versions of themselves, inspired by their interactions with each other. The long-term implications of this bidirectional moral development are impossible to predict, but early indicators suggest we may be witnessing the emergence of a new form of interspecies civilization based on ethical growth rather than resource exchange or territorial negotiation. As Elena finished her report, she looked out at the stream of ships arriving in the Volani system, each carrying humans eager to learn about kindness and to teach about growth. In the distance, she could see Volani vessels beginning their first tentative journeys to human space, carrying aliens who wanted to understand how beings could inspire each other to greatness. The being who had given water to a lost human had started something much larger than anyone could have imagined. And it was just the beginning. 5 years after Sarah Chen's rescue, the Volani Human Ethical Exchange Program had become one of the most successful interspecies initiatives in recorded history. The research station in Volani space had grown into a small city, populated by philosophers, scientists, and students from both species working together to explore questions of moral development and social responsibility. Admiral Zhang Wei, commander of the Third Fleet, read the progress reports with a mixture of admiration and concern as his flagship approached the Volani system. The exchange program had produced remarkable results, breakthrough discoveries in both ethics and applied technology, new models for peaceful interspecies cooperation, and a generation of humans and Volani who considered themselves members of a shared philosophical community. But Zhang was not visiting the Volani world to celebrate these achievements. 3 days ago, long-range sensors had detected the approach of an unknown fleet from the galactic core. The vessels were massive, heavily armed, and following a trajectory that would bring them into Volani space within the week. Zhang's fleet represented the largest military force humans had ever assembled. 250 ships, including the newest dreadnoughts and carrier vessels, along with support craft and logistics ships. The fleet had been assembled quietly over the past 6 months as intelligence reports suggested that something was stirring in the unexplored regions beyond human space. What Zhang hadn't told his crews yet was that the approaching fleet was almost certainly hostile. The sensor signatures matched descriptions from ancient Volani historical records of species called the Devourers, nomadic raiders who consumed the resources of entire worlds before moving on to the next target. According to Volani legends, the Devourers had last visited this region of space nearly 1,000 years ago. They had strip-mined 6 worlds and enslaved 2 species before disappearing back into the galactic core. The Volani had survived only because their ancestors had hidden in underground caverns and posed as a primitive species with nothing worth taking. Now, the Devourers were returning, and this time they would find a thriving world inhabited by Volani who had learned to think in terms of growth and development rather than mere survival. They would also find humans who had spent 5 years learning to consider the Volani as cherished friends and partners. Zhang established communication with the research station as his fleet moved into defensive positions around the Volani world. Dr. Vasquez appeared on his command screen, looking older than he remembered, but still sharp and focused. "Admiral Zhang," she said without preamble, "I assume you're here because of the incoming fleet? You're aware of the situation?" The Volani have been monitoring long-range space for centuries. They detected the approaching vessels weeks ago and have been debating how to respond. They've shared their historical records with us. We know what the Devourers did the last time they came here. Zhang pulled up the tactical displays. "Dr. Vasquez, I need you to begin immediate evacuation procedures. My fleet can provide escort for civilian vessels, but I need to get non-combatants away from the potential battle zone." Elena shook her head. "Admiral, the Volani aren't evacuating. They've decided to stay and defend their world." Zhang felt a chill of concern. The Volani were peaceful beings with no military tradition and minimal defensive technology. Against the Devourers, they would be helpless. Dr. Vasquez, with respect to our Volani friends, this isn't a decision they can make effectively. They lack the military knowledge to understand what they're facing. Admiral, you don't understand. The Volani have been preparing for this possibility for months. When they detected the approaching fleet, they sent a message throughout their global communication network. Every Volani on the planet knows what's coming, and they've unanimously decided that they will not abandon their world. Zhang rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. Dr. Vasquez, I have orders to protect Volani space from hostile incursion. I can't do that effectively if I'm also trying to protect the planet's entire population from orbital bombardment. Admiral, there's something else you need to know. The humans at the research station have also voted to stay. Every single person here, scientists, philosophers, even the cafeteria staff, has decided to remain and assist in the defense however they can. Zhang stared at the screen in disbelief. Dr. Vasquez, these are civilians. They have no training in combat situations. I'm ordering immediate evacuation of all human personnel. Elena's expression was calm, but firm. Admiral, with respect, you can't order us to leave. The research station operates under the authority of the Interspecies Cooperation Treaty, not military command. And, more importantly, we won't abandon our friends. Zhang realized he was facing a situation unlike any in his military experience. His tactical training told him to evacuate non-combatants and establish clear battle lines. His strategic analysis suggested that defending a populated world against a superior force was nearly impossible. But the humans and Volani in this system had apparently decided that some things were more important than tactical considerations. Dr. Vasquez, he said carefully, can you at least move the civilian population to the far side of the planet, away from the likely approach vectors? We can do that, but, Admiral, there's something you should know about what the Volani have been planning. It's not just about hiding or surviving. They've been working on something they call the Great Sharing. Zhang felt his headache getting worse. The Great Sharing? Admiral, you need to speak directly with Theranon. I think he can explain better than I can. The communication screen switched to show the Volani leader who had first helped Sarah Chun 5 years ago. Zhang had met him during previous diplomatic visits and had been impressed by his quiet wisdom and thoughtful approach to problems. Admiral Zhang, Theranon said, his translated voice carrying its familiar tone of calm certainty. We are grateful that you have come to help defend our world. But we must tell you that we do not intend merely to survive this encounter. Theranon, survival should be your first priority. The Devourers are experienced raiders with overwhelming military superiority. Admiral, you have taught us much about human approaches to moral development. One thing we have learned is that growth often requires facing challenges that seem impossible. We believe this encounter with the Devourers represents such a challenge. Zhang felt a growing sense of dread. What exactly are you planning? Theranon made the musical sound that indicated he was choosing his words carefully. Admiral, when your Sarah was lost and alone, we shared our water with her because she needed it. When your people learned of this, they responded with generosity that transformed both our species. We believe the Devourers are also lost and alone in a spiritual sense. They have forgotten what it means to create and nurture rather than simply consume. Zhang stared at the screen, wondering if the translation system was malfunctioning. Theranon, are you saying you want to show kindness to the beings who are coming to destroy your world? Not kindness, Admiral. Understanding. We want to show them what they have forgotten, that taking from others ultimately leaves one empty, while sharing with others creates abundance. Zhang realized the Volani were planning something suicidally naive. Theranon, the Devourers are not lost travelers in need of water. They're predators who have spent centuries perfecting the art of planetary exploitation. They won't be moved by philosophical demonstrations. Perhaps not, Theranon agreed. But, Admiral, consider what your people have accomplished in the 5 years since we shared water with Sarah. You have transformed yourselves into beings capable of tremendous generosity and moral courage. If humans can change so dramatically in response to a simple kindness, Perhaps even the Devourers can remember what they once were. Zhang felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. He had been prepared for a military engagement against hostile aliens. He had not been prepared to protect idealistic philosophers who wanted to reform galactic pirates through the power of good example. Therein, what specifically does this great sharing involve? When the Devourers arrive, we will offer them everything they seek without resistance. Our technology, our resources, our knowledge, we will share it all freely. But we will also share our understanding of what sharing creates. We will show them what we have learned from humans about growth and development and mutual inspiration. Zhang realized the full scope of what the Villani were proposing. They intended to demonstrate the principles that had transformed human-Villani relations to a species that had been raiding and pillaging for centuries. It was either the most enlightened response in the history of interspecies conflict or the most elaborate form of suicide ever devised. Admiral, therein continued, we know this seems impossible to your military thinking, but we have learned from humans that impossible things become possible when beings inspire each other to exceed their normal limitations. We believe the Devourers can be inspired to remember what they have forgotten. Zhang looked at his tactical displays, showing the approaching hostile fleet and his own defensive formations. In 3 days, he would face the largest military engagement of his career, defending a planet full of beings who intended to respond to invasion with philosophical outreach. Therein, he said finally, I will defend your world with everything I have. But I need you to understand that if your great sharing fails, you may not get a second chance to try military resistance. We understand, Admiral, but we have learned from humans that some chances are worth taking, even if the outcome is uncertain. Your people took such a chance when they decided to respond to our small kindness with such tremendous generosity. Now we will take a chance on responding to threatened destruction with offer transformation. Zhang ended the communication and turned to his tactical officer. Commander Santos, what's our current defensive posture? All ships in position, Admiral. Defensive grid established around the planet. We're as ready as we can be given the circumstances. Zhang nodded and opened a fleet-wide communication channel. All ships, this is Admiral Zhang. In 3 days, we will engage a hostile force that outnumbers us 3-1. Our mission is to defend the Villani world and the humans working there. What I haven't told you yet is that our allies have decided to respond to this threat with something unprecedented. They intend to offer friendship to beings who come as conquerors. Zhang paused, knowing how impossible this would sound to his combat-trained crews. I know this seems naive or even insane from a military perspective, but I want you all to remember why we're here. 5 years ago, the beings we're protecting shared their water with a stranded human without expecting anything in return. That simple act inspired humanity to become more generous and more cooperative than we had ever been before. Zhang looked at the tactical display one more time, seeing the impossible odds and the approaching deadline. Now our friends believe they can inspire their enemies the same way they inspired us. Our job is to make sure they get the chance to try. And if they fail, our job is to make sure they survive to try again. As Zhang's fleet prepared for the most unusual battle in human history, supply ships throughout human space began changing course toward the Villani system. Word had spread through the communication networks that the beings who had shown kindness to Sarah-chan were facing destruction, and humanity was responding the way it had learned to respond to threats against the Villani. But this time, the response would not be measured in water purification systems and agricultural equipment. This time, humanity would discover what it meant to defend the beings who had taught them the true meaning of generosity. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of metallic locusts, their ships dark and angular, designed for intimidation as much as function. Admiral Zhang watched from the bridge of his flagship as 375 hostile vessels arranged themselves in attack formation just outside the Villani system's defensive perimeter. Zhang had spent the last 3 days trying to convince the Villani to reconsider their great sharing plan, but they had remained adamant. Now, as he watched the massive enemy fleet take position, he wondered if he was about to witness the end of the most remarkable interspecies friendship in human history. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the Devourer fleet. It's a standard surrender demand." Zhang nodded grimly. "Put it through." The main screen filled with the image of a being that looked like humanity's worst nightmare. The Devourer commander was tall and skeletal, with gray-green skin stretched tight over visible bones. Its eyes were small and black, and its mouth was filled with sharp teeth designed for tearing rather than speaking. When it spoke, its voice was a harsh rasp that the translation system struggled to process. "Inferior species," the Devourer commander began without preamble. "You inhabit worlds that contain resources we require. Surrender immediately, and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and we will consume your worlds slowly while you watch." Zhang activated his own transmission system. "This is Admiral Zhang of the Human Third Fleet. You're entering sovereign space belonging to the Villani people, who are under human protection. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The Devourer commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "Humans. Yes, we have heard rumors of your species. Young, weak, foolishly idealistic. Your ships are new and untested. Our vessels have conquered 1,000 worlds. Withdraw now, and we may allow you to flee before we begin harvesting." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Zhang replied calmly. "We have obligations to our friends that we take very seriously." The transmission ended, and Zhang turned to his tactical officer. "Commander Santos, what's our assessment?" Santos pulled up the enemy formation analysis. "Admiral, they have us outgunned and outnumbered, but their ship designs are old. They rely on overwhelming firepower rather than advanced technology. If we can use our superior maneuverability and targeting systems, we might be able to even the odds." Zhang nodded, but before he could respond, another voice came over the communication system. It was Theranon, speaking from the planet's surface. "Admiral Zhang, the Devourer fleet has also sent a surrender demand to our world. We are preparing to respond." Zhang felt a moment of panic. "Theranon, please coordinate any response with my tactical team. A poorly timed communication could trigger their attack before we're ready." "Admiral, we understand your concerns, but we must proceed with the great sharing as planned. We are transmitting our response now." Zhang watched helplessly as the Villani transmitted their message to the Devourer fleet. He expected it to be some kind of surrender offer, but what he heard instead left him speechless. Theranon's voice, speaking in the musical tones of his native language, but with translation provided, addressed the Devourer commander directly. "Honored visitors from the deep void, we welcome you to our world. We understand that you seek resources, and we are prepared to share everything we have with you freely. But first, we would like to offer you something more precious than any material wealth: the opportunity to remember what you were before you became lost in the darkness between stars." The response from the Devourer fleet was immediate and hostile. Zhang's sensors detected weapons systems charging across the enemy formation. But before the Devourers could open fire, Theranon continued. "We know your history, children of the void. Your species was once like ours, builders and creators who found joy in growth and sharing. But somewhere in your long journey through space, you forgot these things and became consumers instead. We offer you the chance to remember." Zhang was about to order his fleet to battle stations when something unexpected happened. The Devourer weapons systems powered down. On his main screen, Zhang could see the alien commander leaning forward, its black eyes fixed on something off-camera. "Impossible," the Devourer rasped. "You cannot know our history. We destroyed all records of what we were before." Theranon's voice remained calm and musical. "You destroyed the records, but you could not destroy the patterns. We see in your ship designs the echoes of buildings meant for beauty, not just function. We see in your formation tactics the ghost of dances performed around community fires. We see in your very beings the children of creators who have forgotten how to create." Zhang watched in fascination as the Devourer commander seemed to struggle with what it was hearing. The alien's hands moved to controls that Zhang's tactical systems identified as weapons targeting, but then hesitated. You speak of things that no longer exist, the Devourer commander said, but its voice carried less certainty than before. We are what we have become. We take what we need and move on. This is the way of survival in the void. Yes, Theranon agreed. It is one way of survival. But we have learned from our human friends that there are other ways. Ways that lead not just to survival, but to growth and joy and the creation of beauty. We would like to share these ways with you. Zhang realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in military history. The Villani were conducting psychological warfare not through intimidation or deception, but through genuine compassion and insight into their enemy's deepest nature. The Devourer commander was quiet for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was different, still harsh, but with an undertone of something that might have been uncertainty. What you speak of is impossible. We have traveled the void for too long. We have consumed too much. We cannot simply change. Cannot. Theranon's voice carried gentle challenge. Or have you simply never been offered the opportunity? We offer it now, freely and without conditions. Land on our world. Let us show you what we have learned about transformation and growth. If you decide our way is not for you, you may take what resources you need and continue your journey. But you will do so knowing that another path exists. Zhang watched his tactical displays with growing amazement. The Devourer fleet, which had been in perfect attack formation moments before, was beginning to show signs of disorder. Some ships maintained their positions, but others were drifting slightly, as if their commanders were uncertain about their next move. The Devourer commander looked off-screen again, presumably conferring with its subordinates. When it returned its attention to the communication, Zhang could see something in its alien features that looked almost like pain. You do not understand what you offer, the commander said. We're not the beings you think we remember. We have done things. We have consumed entire civilizations. We have turned beautiful worlds into lifeless rocks. How do you propose to teach transformation to beings who have committed such acts? Zhang found himself holding his breath as he waited for Theranon's response. The question struck at the heart of whether redemption was possible for beings who had chosen a path of destruction and stayed on it for centuries. Honored Commander, Theranon said gently, 5 years ago, a human named Sarah crashed on our world. She was lost, alone, and desperate. We gave her water because she needed it, expecting nothing in return. That simple act began a transformation that has touched millions of beings across 2 species. The Villani leader paused, and Zhang could almost feel him choosing his words carefully. You speak of the things you have done as if they define what you must always be. But we have learned that what beings do flows from what they believe about themselves and their place in the universe. If you believe you're only consumers, you will only consume. But if you remember that you're also creators, you may choose to create again. The Devourer commander was silent for nearly a full minute. Around its fleet, Zhang could see more ships breaking formation, some moving closer to the planet, others retreating slightly. The unity that had characterized their approach was dissolving into uncertainty and debate. And if we choose to land on your world, the commander asked finally, what guarantee do we have that this is not some elaborate trap? What assurance can you give that you will not use our moment of vulnerability to destroy us? Theranon's answer was simple and devastating. The same assurance we gave Sarah when she crashed alone and helpless on our world. None, except our word and our nature. Zhang realized that the Villani had just offered to trust their potential destroyers the same way they had trusted a strange alien who had fallen from the sky 5 years ago. They were betting their entire civilization on the belief that the same impulse that had led them to help Sarah would resonate with something buried deep in the Devourer's psyche. The Devourer commander looked directly into the communication pickup, and Zhang could see something shifting in its alien features. You would truly trust us with your world? After knowing what we are and what we have done, we trust you with our world because of what you are and what you have done, Theranon corrected gently. You are beings who have forgotten how to create, and you have done terrible things because of that forgetting. But beings who can forget can also remember. Beings who can transform themselves into destroyers can transform themselves into creators again. Zhang watched as the Devourer fleet began to fundamentally reorganize itself. Ships that had been in attack formation started moving into what looked almost like a protective circle around their command vessel. The gesture was subtle, but Zhang's tactical systems recognized it as a defensive posture designed to protect something valuable rather than to threaten something else. The Devourer commander turned away from the communication pickup, and Zhang could hear harsh voices speaking in the background, presumably other Devourer leaders debating their response to the Vellani offer. The discussion went on for several minutes, with voices rising and falling in what sounded like intense argument. Finally, the commander returned to the screen. Its expression was unreadable, but Zhang noticed that its posture had changed. Instead of the aggressive stance it had maintained earlier, it now stood straighter, almost formally. "Vellani of the Peaceful Waters," it said, "using the formal address protocols, we will accept your offer. But we must warn you, we do not know if what you seek to accomplish is possible. We have been what we are for so long that we may have forgotten how to be anything else." "Then we will remember together," Theranon replied. "And if remembering proves impossible, we will create new ways of being that neither of our species has tried before." Zhang watched in amazement as the massive Devourer fleet began to move toward the planet in what was clearly a landing approach rather than an attack formation. After 5 years of watching humans learn about generosity from the Vellani, he was now about to witness the Vellani attempt to teach the most feared raiders in the galaxy about redemption and transformation. He opened a fleet-wide communication to his ships. "All vessels maintain defensive positions, but do not target Devourer ships unless they take hostile action. We are about to witness either the most successful diplomatic initiative in galactic history, or the most elaborate suicide in Vellani history. Either way, our job is to make sure our friends get the chance to find out which one it is." As the first Devourer ships began their descent toward the planet's surface, Zhang found himself thinking about Sarah Chun and the simple act of sharing water that had started all of this. He wondered if she had ever imagined that her rescue would eventually lead to a moment when an entire civilization would bet its existence on the power of kindness to transform even the most unlikely candidates. 2 months after the Devourer fleet's arrival at the Vellani world, Admiral Zhang stood in what had once been a military command center and was now something unprecedented in galactic history. A joint operations facility where former raiders worked alongside their intended victims to plan humanitarian missions. The transformation had not been immediate or easy. The first weeks had been tense, with Devourer ships landing cautiously while human forces maintained ready defensive positions. Many of the raiders had been skeptical of Vellani intentions, convinced that the offer of redemption was either a trap or naive foolishness that would quickly prove unworkable. But Theranon and the Vellani had approached the challenge of transforming their former enemies with the same patient wisdom they had shown in everything else. They had started small, inviting individual Devourer commanders to visit their communities and observe daily life. They had shared their food, their technology, and, most importantly, their stories about growth and change. Zhang reviewed the daily briefing reports on his datapad, still amazed by what he was reading. The Devourer commander who had led the initial attack fleet, a being whose name translated as First Harvester, had been working with Vellani engineers to redesign his massive warship into a mobile hospital. The vessel that had been equipped to strip mine planets was being converted to provide emergency medical aid to underdeveloped worlds. Dr. Vasquez approached Zhang's position near the central planning table, where Vellani and Devourer representatives were coordinating the next phase of what they had begun calling the Restoration Project. "Admiral," Elena said, "I wanted to update you on the psychological assessments we've been conducting. The results are remarkable, but also complicated." Zhang looked up from his reports. "Complicated how?" Elena pulled up holographic displays showing brain scans and behavioral analysis charts. The Devourers weren't lying when they said they had been raiders for centuries. The psychological conditioning goes very deep. Their entire social structure, their language patterns, even their neural pathways have been shaped by generations of predatory behavior. Zhang felt a chill of concern. Are you saying the transformation isn't working? No, actually the opposite. The transformation is working better than we had any right to expect. But it's causing psychological stress that we didn't anticipate. Some of the Devourers are experiencing what we can only describe as profound grief as they remember what they used to be and confront what they became. Elena showed Zhang recordings of Devourer individuals working in Villani gardens, their movements awkward and uncertain as they tried to learn how to nurture plants instead of destroying them. Their faces, when visible, showed expressions that the translation systems interpreted as confusion mixed with something approaching wonder. Dr. Vasquez, are we causing them harm by encouraging this transformation? Elena considered the question carefully. Admiral, I think we're causing them the same kind of harm that any profound personal growth causes. They're grieving for lost time, for opportunities wasted, for lives that could have been different. But they're also discovering capacities for joy and creation that they had forgotten they possessed. Zhang nodded, but before he could respond, Theranon approached their position. The Villani leader looked tired, but deeply satisfied, the way someone might look after completing difficult but meaningful work. Admiral Zhang, Dr. Vasquez, Theranon said in his musical tones, we have received a communication that I think will interest you greatly. Zhang accepted the communication device Theranon offered. The message was from Sarah Chun, the human whose rescue had started the entire chain of events that led to this moment. Admiral Zhang, Sarah's recorded voice said, I've been following the reports about what's happening at the Villani world, and I can hardly believe it. When those people gave me water 5 years ago, I thought it was just a simple act of kindness. I never imagined it would lead to this. The recording continued, showing Sarah at her current assignment on a terraforming project in the Centauri system. I wanted to contribute something to what the Villani are doing with the Devourers. My engineering team has been working on atmospheric processors that could help restore some of the worlds the Raiders damaged in the past. If they're serious about making amends, maybe they'd like to help fix what they broke. Zhang looked at Theranon, who was making the musical sound that indicated pleased anticipation. Theranon, is Sarah suggesting what I think she's suggesting? Yes, Admiral. She proposes that we organize expeditions to repair the damage the Devourers caused during their raiding period. The Devourers would provide knowledge of what was destroyed, humans would provide technology and expertise, and Villani would provide guidance in the spiritual aspects of restoration. Zhang realized the scope of what was being proposed. You're talking about a galaxy-wide restoration project that could take centuries to complete. Yes, Theranon agreed. We are talking about transforming the most destructive force in this region of space into the most constructive one. We're talking about demonstrating that redemption is possible on a scale that has never been attempted before. Elena stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. Theranon, have the Devourers agreed to participate in such a project? Dr. Vasquez, many of them have not just agreed, they have insisted. The being you know as First Harvester has provided us with detailed records of every world his fleets damaged over the past 50 years. He says that remembering what he was makes it impossible for him to ignore what he did, and that the only way he can live with both truths is by working to repair the damage. Zhang pulled up a star chart showing the region of space where Devourer raids had been reported over the past century. The area was vast, encompassing hundreds of star systems and dozens of habitable worlds. Theranon, the logistics alone would be staggering. We're talking about coordinating operations across hundreds of light years. Yes, Admiral, but consider what humans achieved in just 5 years after we shared water with Sarah. When beings decide to exceed their previous limitations, remarkable things become possible. Zhang was about to respond when his communication officer signaled for attention. Admiral, we're receiving priority transmissions from throughout human space. It appears word of the restoration project has leaked to the general population. Zhang accepted the communications and watched in amazement as reports flooded in from across human civilization. Mining consortiums were volunteering to provide raw materials for reconstruction efforts. Agricultural worlds were offering seed banks to help restore damaged ecosystems. Research institutions were proposing joint expeditions to study the feasibility of large-scale planetary restoration. But, perhaps most remarkably, individual humans were volunteering to participate in the project. The messages spoke of wanting to contribute to the work that had grown from the Villani kindness to Sarah Chun. They spoke of feeling honored to help beings who had shown the galaxy what transformation looked like when approached with wisdom and compassion. Elena reviewed the incoming messages on her own datapad. Admiral, it's not just humans responding. We're getting communications from dozens of species that have been raided by devourers in the past. They're offering to participate in restoration efforts for worlds in their regions. Zhang realized they were witnessing the emergence of something unprecedented in galactic history. A voluntary coalition of species working together not for conquest or trade, but for the healing of damaged worlds and the redemption of those who had damaged them. Theranon made the sound that indicated he wanted to share something particularly important. Admiral, Dr. Vasquez, there's something else you should know. Yesterday, we received a communication from the Galactic Council. Zhang felt a moment of concern. The Galactic Council was the loose confederation of older species that generally avoided involvement in the affairs of younger civilizations. Their attention was rarely welcome. The Council has been monitoring our activities here, Theranon continued, and they have made a formal request. They want to establish a permanent observation post to study what we have accomplished. They believe that what has happened here represents a new model for interspecies relations that could have implications throughout the galaxy. Elena looked up from her datapad. Theranon, what kind of implications? Dr. Vasquez, the council representative, stated that they have never before observed one species successfully inspiring profound transformation in another through purely peaceful means. They believe that if such transformation can be achieved with beings as deeply conditioned as the Devourers, it might be possible to resolve conflicts throughout the galaxy using similar approaches. Zhang felt the weight of realization settling on him. What had begun as a simple rescue mission and an act of alien kindness had evolved into something that might change the fundamental nature of how civilized species interacted with each other. Admiral, Theranon continued, there is one more thing. The Council has asked us to consider establishing what they call a center for transformational diplomacy here in our system. It would be a place where species in conflict could come to learn the methods we have developed for inspiring positive change in others. Zhang looked around the command center, watching Villani, humans, and former Devourers working together to plan missions of healing and restoration. 6 months ago, this scene would have been unimaginable. Now it seemed like the natural result of taking seriously the implications of kindness shown to a stranger. Theranon, Zhang said finally, when your people gave water to Sarah Chun, did you have any idea it would lead to this? The Villani leader made the musical sound that indicated thoughtful reflection. Admiral, we gave water to Sarah because she needed it, and we had it to share. We never imagined the consequences would be so far-reaching. But we have learned that the universe seems to respond to sincere kindness by creating opportunities for even greater kindness. Zhang nodded, thinking about the fleet of vessels now leaving the Villani system to begin restoration work on their first target world, a planet that had been strip-mined by Devourers 30 years ago and was now going to be healed by a joint effort that included some of the same beings who had damaged it. As he watched the ships depart on their mission of healing, Zhang reflected on the most important lesson he had learned from the Villani, that the true measure of any civilization was not what it could destroy, but what it could inspire others to create. The beings who had shared their water with a lost human had shown the galaxy that even the most unlikely transformations were possible when approached with genuine compassion and infinite patience. And now the transformation was spreading from star to star, carried by beings who had learned that the greatest victories were won not through conquest, but through inspiring others to become better versions of themselves. In her final report on the restoration project's first year, Dr. Elena Vasquez wrote, "What began as one alien's simple decision to share water with a stranger has become a galactic movement toward healing and redemption. We have learned that kindness is not just a moral choice, but a practical force capable of transforming entire civilizations. The Villani taught us that helping others helps ourselves. The Devourers taught us that even the most damaged beings can remember how to create rather than destroy. And humanity taught us that inspiration shared freely multiplies exponentially across space and time. The universe, it seems, has been waiting for someone to demonstrate that transformation is possible. The Villani provided that demonstration, and now the galaxy will never be the same.